Admiral Vex Thorin of the Galactic Coalition stood on the observation deck of the Eternal Vigilance, watching the death of a world through tear-rimmed ocular membranes. Below him, the jeweled surface of Zalara Prime burned with 1,000 fires, each flame representing millions of souls crying out in agony as the Vorathi Dominion continued their methodical extermination. 3 standard cycles ago, Zalara Prime had been a paradise. A founding member of the Coalition, the Zelaran people had cultivated their world into a garden of crystalline spires and bioluminescent forests. They were philosophers and artists, their contributions to galactic culture immeasurable. They had believed, as had the entire Coalition, that reason and diplomacy could solve any conflict. The Vorathi had taught them otherwise.
"Admiral," whispered his aide, Commander Trillax, her voice barely audible above the background hum of the ship's systems. "The Vorathi flagship is hailing us. They wish to discuss terms of our withdrawal."
Vex Thorin didn't turn from the viewport. Terms of withdrawal? They slaughter billions, and they wish to discuss our withdrawal? They know we cannot defeat them, sir. Our fleet is outnumbered 4 to 1. The Vorathi hive mind has calculated our defeat with 99.7% certainty. The Admiral's tentacles curled with impotent rage. The Vorathi hive mind was never wrong. Their collective consciousness processed information at speeds that made even the most advanced Coalition computers seem primitive. They didn't just predict battles, they predetermined them. Every tactical scenario had been analyzed, every possible counter-strategy anticipated. The Vorathi didn't fight wars, they executed mathematical conclusions. "How many ships do we have remaining?" Vex Thorin asked. 47 capital ships, 112 cruisers, and approximately 300 support vessels. The Vorathi have 189 capital ships, with supporting armada of over 1,000 lesser vessels. Trillax paused, her antennae drooping. "Sir, the mathematics are undeniable. If we engage, we die. If we die, the Vorathi proceed to the next system. The Coalition falls, world by world." "And if we retreat?" "Then Zalara Prime dies, and the Vorathi proceed to the next system anyway. The Coalition falls, world by world." She hesitated. "There is no scenario where we win, Admiral. The hive mind has made this clear in their transmission. They want us to understand the futility of resistance." Vex Thorin finally turned from the viewport. His species, the Thalorians, were known for their emotional resonance, the ability to feel the suffering of others as if it were their own. Right now, he could feel the terror of 7 billion Exolorans as orbital bombardment turned their cities to glass. It was a weight that threatened to crush his soul. "There must be something we haven't tried," he said. "Some strategy, some alliance." "Sir," another officer interrupted, her voice carrying an unusual tremor. "We're receiving a response to our general distress call, priority channel." Vex Thorin's secondary hearts quickened. The Primordian Collective? The vast empire? Which of our allies has finally answered? The officer's mandibles clicked in confusion. "Neither, sir. The response is, it's from the humans." A cold silence fell over the bridge. "That's impossible," Trillax said. "The humans are a pre-FTL civilization. They haven't even achieved unified planetary governance. They're barely out of their nuclear age." "Nevertheless, the transmission is confirmed," the officer replied. "It originated from their third planet, the one they call Earth. They intercepted our distress call, somehow, and they're responding." "What do they say?" The officer's eyes widened as she processed the translation. They say they're coming. Admiral Vex Thoran would have laughed if the situation weren't so tragic. The humans, a species so primitive they still measured distances in units based on the length of their leader's feet. A species that had come within a whisker of annihilating themselves with nuclear weapons not 3 of their generations ago. A species that the Galactic Coalition had deemed too dangerous and unpredictable for first contact. Even if they could somehow reach us, he said wearily, what could they possibly do? They have no fleet, no FTL capability, no understanding of galactic warfare. Sir, the officer said, her voice now barely a whisper, there's more to the transmission. They say they've been watching. They say they know what the Varathi have done. They say they're bringing their fleet. They have no fleet! Admiral. The officer looked up, her compound eyes reflecting something that might have been fear or might have been awe. The transmission includes coordinates for an emergence point. They want us to clear the area around the Zelleran moon. They say they'll need room. Room for what? They didn't specify. They only said one more thing. Which was? The officer's translation matrix hummed. They said, "Tell the Varathi that humanity remembers, and humanity is coming." Part 2. The Impossible Approach. 12 hours passed. 12 hours of continued bombardment, of screaming transmissions from the planet's surface, of desperate evacuations that saved thousands while millions burned. 12 hours of the Varathi hive mind's patient, calculated genocide. Admiral Vex Thoran had repositioned his fleet as the human transmission requested, clearing a sphere around Zalara Prime's largest moon. It was a fool's errand, he knew. The humans couldn't possibly arrive. They were 47 light-years away, locked in their little solar system with technology that could barely reach their own satellite. But something about their transmission had stirred something in him. Something in the way they said, humanity remembers. It carried a weight, a darkness, that made his emotional resonance abilities recoil. What did they remember, and why did it matter? Admiral, Commander Trillax reported, the Varathi are querying our fleet repositioning. They're amused. Amused? The hive mind has analyzed the human transmission. They've calculated the probability of human intervention at less than 0.001%. They're treating it as a delusion brought on by our desperation. She paused. They're not entirely wrong, sir. Perhaps not. But if there's even a fraction of a chance... Contact! The sensor officer's scream cut through the bridge. Subspace rupture detected at the designated coordinates. Multiple contacts. Multiple... His voice broke. Admiral, I'm reading impossible numbers. The main view screen flickered, then displayed the space around the Zelleran moon. At first, there was nothing, just the empty void, stars glittering in eternal silence. Then the void itself seemed to tear open. Space buckled, warped, and then exploded with light as ships emerged. Not one ship, not 10, not 100. Thousands. Admiral Vex Thoran's legs gave out, and he collapsed into his command chair, his mind struggling to process what his eyes were showing him. They emerged in formations that defied coalition understanding of fleet deployment. Massive dreadnoughts bristling with weapon systems that made Varathi technology look archaic. Carrier vessels disgorging swarms of fighter craft that moved with coordinated precision. Battle cruisers with energy signatures that shouldn't have been possible for a species that had supposedly just discovered fire a few millennia ago. And at the center of the formation, a ship that dwarfed everything else. A vessel so massive that it created its own gravitational distortion, painted in colors that Vexthoran's species could barely perceive, decorated with symbols that made his emotional resonance abilities scream with warnings. Trillax whispered, "That's not possible. That's a world ship-class vessel. No species has built one since the precursors vanished 3 million years ago." "Count them," Vexthoran commanded. "Count the ships." The sensor officer's voice was shaking. "I can't, sir. The sensors are overloading. There are too many. I'm reading at least 12,000 capital-class vessels, approximately 50,000 support craft, and—" He paused, recalibrating. "Sir, more are still coming through." The view screen showed the impossible fleet spreading out around the moon like a metallic sunrise, ships taking formation with a precision that spoke of countless drills, countless battles. "We're receiving a transmission from the lead vessel," the communications officer announced. "It's the world ship. They're identifying themselves as the Remember the Fallen. And, Admiral, they're asking to speak with the Varathi hive mind." On screen, Vexthoran breathed. The image that appeared was like nothing he expected. He had seen archival footage of humans, primitive creatures, soft and vulnerable, easy to kill. The beings on screen shared their basic form, but radiated something entirely different. They wore uniforms of stark black, decorated with medals and insignia that told stories Vexthoran couldn't read. Their faces were hard, their eyes harder. The being at the center of the image was a female of their species, older than the others, her hair the color of their star at its zenith. But it was her eyes that captured Vexthoran's attention. They were the eyes of someone who had seen too much, lost too much, and found something terrible in the ashes of that loss. "I am Admiral Elena Vance, commander of the Human Expeditionary Force," she said, her voice carrying through the translation matrix with perfect clarity. "This message is directed at the Varathi collective consciousness. You have exactly 60 seconds to cease all hostile operations against Zilara Prime and surrender your fleet. This is not a negotiation. This is a notification." The silence that followed was absolute. Then, the Varathi responded. Part 3. The Hive Mind's Calculation. The Varathi hive mind was not a single entity, but a chorus of billions. Every Varathi linked in a neural network that spanned their entire civilization. When they spoke with one voice, one mind, one purpose. That voice now echoed across all frequencies, directed at the impossible human fleet. "You are an anomaly," the hive mind stated. "Our records show humanity as a pre-FTL species, technologically primitive, politically fragmented. You should not exist in this form." Admiral Vance's expression didn't change. "Your records are incomplete." "Explain." "No." The hive mind paused, an unusual occurrence. When billions of minds calculated simultaneously, delays were measured in nanoseconds. This pause lasted nearly a full second. "Your fleet is impressive," the hive mind continued, "but ultimately irrelevant. We have analyzed your weapon signatures. We have calculated your tactical capabilities. While unexpected, your forces do not significantly alter the probability matrix." "Is that so?" The mathematics are clear. Your 12,000 vessels against our 189 capital ships represent superior numbers, but our technological advantage and tactical coordination compensate. Victory probability for the Dominion remains at 67.3%. On the bridge of the Eternal Vigilance, Commander Trillax leaned toward Vexthorin. "The hive mind is never wrong about calculations," she whispered. "If they say they can win—" "Be silent," Vexthorin replied, his eyes fixed on Admiral Vance. There was something in her expression, a dangerous calm that made his resonance abilities quiver with warning. "You calculate a 67.3% chance of victory," Vance repeated. "Would you like to know what we calculate?" "The human capacity for self-delusion is noted. Your calculations are irrelevant." "Perhaps. But humor me." Vance leaned forward. "We calculate that within the next 6 minutes, your fleet will be completely destroyed. We calculate that your hive mind will experience something it has never experienced before: fear. And we calculate that by the end of this engagement, the Vorathi Dominion will cease to exist as a threat to any species in this galaxy." The hive mind's response was immediate and dismissive. "Your calculations are flawed. No species has ever defeated the Dominion in direct engagement. Your confidence is amusing but irrelevant." "One more thing," Vance said, her voice dropping to something cold and terrible. "You asked why our records show us as primitive. You asked how we came to possess this fleet, this technology. You want to know what we remember." "Irrelevant data. We remember the architects." The silence that followed was different. On the Vorathi flagship, Admiral Vexthoran saw the impossible. Vorathi bridge officers hesitating, their perfect coordination fracturing for just a moment. "Explain your statement," the hive mind demanded, and for the first time there was something other than calculated certainty in its voice. "The architects came to our world 8,000 years ago," Vance continued. "They were ancient, powerful, dying. They were fleeing from something, from you, from the early Vorathi Dominion. You don't remember because your collective consciousness wasn't fully formed yet, but your ancestors hunted them across the galaxy, consumed their worlds, absorbed their technology. The precursors vanished. They were not. They didn't vanish. They fled, and they found us." Vance's eyes burned. "They found a primitive species on a small blue world, barely learning to farm, still painting on cave walls. And they saw something in us, something that terrified them and gave them hope in equal measure." "What did they see?" "Rage." The word hung in the void between fleets. "They saw a species that fought against everything, against nature, against each other, against the gods they invented. A species that refused to accept any defeat, any limitation, any fate. They saw a species that would rather die than submit." "Irrelevant. Rage is not a tactical advantage." "No, the architects didn't think so. They gave us everything, their technology, their knowledge, their history. And they gave us a warning. They told us about you, about what you did to them, what you've done to 100 other species. They told us to prepare." Admiral Vance stood, and the camera followed her as she walked to a viewport on her bridge. Outside, the human fleet stretched to infinity. For 8,000 years we prepared, we built, we trained, we let the galaxy believe we were primitive because the architects told us you were watching, waiting for any threat to emerge. We hid our true capability behind a mask of barbarism and conflict, pretending to be savages fighting over scraps of rock, while we constructed fleets in hidden shipyards, developed weapons that the architects themselves never imagined. This is impossible. Our surveillance. Your surveillance saw what we wanted you to see. Every war, every conflict, every stupid human failing displayed for the galaxy's entertainment. All of it a performance, a mask. We've had FTL capability for 6,000 years. We colonized 100 worlds in dimensions your sensors can't detect. And we waited. For what? For you to reveal yourselves. For you to start another genocide. For the right moment to do what the architects couldn't do, what no species has ever done. The hive mind's calculations spiraled into chaos. Probability matrices that had never failed suddenly showed errors, exceptions, impossibilities. What do you intend? Admiral Elena Vance turned back to the camera, and her smile was the smile of a species that had spent 8 millennia sharpening itself into a weapon. We intend to end you. Part 4. The Doctrine of Absolute Ruin. The battle lasted exactly 4 minutes and 37 seconds. Admiral Vex Thorin watched it unfold from the bridge of the Eternal Vigilance, his mind unable to process what his sensors were showing him. The human fleet didn't fight like any force he had ever seen. There was no elegant maneuvering, no strategic positioning, no attempt to minimize casualties or preserve resources. There was only violence, pure, directed, overwhelming violence that crashed against the Varathi formation like a tsunami against a sandcastle. The first salvo came from the world ship Remember the Fallen, a beam of light that shouldn't have been possible, something that twisted space itself, struck the Varathi flagship directly. The vessel, a dreadnought that had conquered 3 civilizations, simply ceased to exist, not destroyed, erased. The atoms that had composed it were unmade, scattered across dimensions that Vex Thorin's physics couldn't describe. The Varathi formation broke. Not strategically. The hive mind was still calculating, still coordinating, but physically. Ships tried to evade, to reposition, to engage. But the human fighters were already among them, moving with speeds that defied inertia, weapons firing in patterns that anticipated every Varathi maneuver. How are they predicting our movements? The hive mind demanded across all frequencies. Our calculations should be unreadable. You forget, Vance's voice replied, cutting through the chaos. The architects knew you. They studied you for millennia. They understand how your hive mind calculates, how your probability matrices function. And they taught us everything. The human ships weren't just fighting. They were hunting. Each formation moved to cut off retreat, to isolate Varathi vessels, to eliminate them with precision that spoke of absolute certainty. You think in probabilities, Vance continued, as her fleet tore through the Varathi armada. You calculate optimal outcomes, weigh risk against reward. You've never encountered a species that doesn't calculate at all. A species that simply decides what will happen and makes it so. A Varathi cruiser exploded as 3 human frigates concentrated fire on its engines. Another tried to ram a human carrier, only to be caught in a tractor beam and redirected into the path of its own fleet's fire. This isn't a battle, Vex Thorin whispered. This is an execution. It's not even that. Trillax replied, her voice hollow. I don't have a word for it. They're not fighting to win. They're fighting to destroy. There's no restraint, no mercy, no... Humanity doesn't believe in mercy for those who don't deserve it, Vance's voice interrupted. Somehow she was monitoring their communications. The architects taught us about your victims. The Kelleran people who you consumed for their metal-rich bones. The Vexel Harmony who you absorbed because their collective song was mathematically beautiful. 100 species, all gone, all forgotten, except by us. We remember them all, and we're here to balance the ledger. The Vorathi hive mind, for the first time in its million-year existence, experienced something it had only ever observed in its victims. Panic. Retreat! The billion voices screamed as one. All units retreat! Calculate optimal escape vectors! But there were no escape vectors. The human fleet had surrounded them, not through strategic positioning, but through sheer, overwhelming numbers. Every angle was covered. Every exit was blocked. There's nowhere to run, Vance said. There was never going to be anywhere to run. The architects told us what you were. They told us what you would do to the galaxy if you weren't stopped. And they told us what needed to be done. What do you want? Name your terms. Terms? Vance laughed, and it was not a pleasant sound. The Exelarans asked for terms. The Kellerans asked for terms. 100 species begged for mercy while you exterminated them. Did you grant them terms? We are the collective consciousness of 40 billion beings. And the beings you've killed numbered in the trillions. The mathematics don't favor you, hive mind. They never did. The last Vorathi capital ship, a battle-scarred dreadnought that had been trying desperately to protect its smaller vessels, vanished in a flash of that impossible light. With it went the remaining cruisers, frigates, and support craft. 4 minutes and 37 seconds. A fleet of over 1,000 ships, crewed by millions, supported by the computational power of 40 billion linked minds, reduced to atoms in less time than it took for light to travel from a planet to its moon. The silence that followed was absolute. Part 5. The True Fear. Admiral Vexthorin finally found his voice. It's over? On screen, Admiral Elena Vance turned to face him directly. For a moment, the hard warrior's facade cracked, and he saw something underneath. Weariness, sorrow, a burden that had been carried for millennia. The battle is over, she said. The war is just beginning. I don't understand. You destroyed their fleet. Their fleet was a fraction of their total power. The Vorathi Dominion spans 200 star systems, 40 billion beings, all linked to the hive mind, all dedicated to consumption and expansion. We've cut off one arm of the beast. The body remains. Vexthorin's hearts raced. Then they'll send more ships, more fleets. They'll do nothing. Vance's voice was cold again. Because in approximately 17 hours, the main human armada will arrive at the Vorathi homeworld. And when it does, we will end this permanently. End it? How? By doing what should have been done 1,000,000 years ago. By removing the Vorathi from the galaxy entirely. The implications settled over Vexthorin like a shroud. You mean genocide? I mean extinction. But 40 billion lives. Less than the number they've taken. Less than the number they would take if allowed to continue. Vance's jaw tightened. We don't enjoy this, Admiral. We don't take pleasure in destruction. But we learned long ago that some threats cannot be negotiated with, cannot be reformed, cannot be redeemed. The Vorathi consume other species not for survival, but for expansion. They don't coexist, they absorb or destroy. Given the choice between the galaxy's survival and the Vorathi's survival, we choose the galaxy.
But who gave you the right?
No one. Vance's eyes met his through the screen. No one gave us the right. We took it. Because no one else could. Because no one else would. That is what the architects saw in us, Admiral. Not just rage, but responsibility. The willingness to do terrible things so that others don't have to. The strength to carry burdens that would break other species. On the bridge of the eternal vigilance, no one spoke. The coalition officers stared at the human admiral, seeing her not as a savior, but as something else. Something ancient and terrible, wrapped in human flesh. You called us primitives, Vance continued. You looked at our wars, our conflicts, our seemingly endless capacity for self-destruction, and you dismissed us. You didn't understand that those wars were training. Every battle we fought against each other, every weapon we developed, every strategy we conceived, all of it was preparation. We've been fighting for 10,000 years. We've become very, very good at it.
The architects, Vecthorin said slowly. They made you into this?
They gave us the tools. We made ourselves into this. They saw potential, we fulfilled it. They warned us about the Vorathi, about the threat that would one day come. They didn't tell us to become monsters, but they showed us what happens to species that aren't willing to fight, that aren't willing to sacrifice everything for survival. She paused. We saw the graves of 100 civilizations. We walked among the ruins of the architects' own worlds, burned and consumed by the early Vorathi. We learned from their deaths, and we swore that it would never happen to us.
So this is revenge?
This is prevention. The Vorathi will never stop, Admiral. Their nature is consumption. They cannot be negotiated with, because negotiation requires accepting limitations. They cannot be defeated through attrition, because their hive mind adapts to every strategy. The only way to stop them permanently is to remove them from existence entirely. And after them, what then? Do you become the new threat the galaxy must fear? Vance smiled, and for the first time there was genuine warmth in it, mixed with profound sadness. After the Vorathi are gone, we return to our hidden worlds. We resume our vigil. We watch and we wait. And if another threat emerges, one that cannot be reasoned with, cannot be stopped by conventional means, we emerge again. That is our role, Admiral. That is what the architects created us to be.
Which is?
The last resort. The final option. The thing that species pray they never have to call upon, but are grateful exists when they do. She straightened. We call ourselves the Guardians. We are humanity's true face, the one we hide from the universe. We are the nightmare that nightmares fear. Admiral Vex Thorin looked out at the human fleet, still surrounding the moon, still bristling with weapons that could unmake reality. The coalition, he said slowly. We didn't know. We thought humans were primitive, dangerous, unstable. Vance nodded. All true. We are all of those things. We are also the only species in this galaxy's history that looked upon the Vorathi Dominion and said, no, not today, not ever. Make of that what you will. Part 6. The Reckoning. 17 hours later, Admiral Vexthorin stood on the observation deck of a human vessel, the Remember the Fallen itself, and watched the end of a civilization. The human armada had offered him a place aboard, a chance to witness what they called the completion of the architect's vision. He had accepted, not knowing what to expect. Now he knew, and the knowledge would haunt him for the rest of his long life. The Vorathi homeworld was called Vorax Prime, a planet of twisted organic technology and biomechanical structures. 40 billion beings lived upon its surface and in the orbital stations surrounding it, every one of them linked to the hive mind, every one of them an extension of the same terrible consciousness. The human fleet numbered over 100,000 ships. They emerged from dimensional rifts in perfect formation, surrounding the planet like a shell of metal and fire. There was no negotiation, no demand for surrender. There was only the voice of Admiral Vance broadcast on all frequencies. Vorathi Collective Consciousness. 8,000 years ago, you hunted a species called the Architects to extinction. In their final moments, they passed their legacy to us, their knowledge, their technology, and their warning. Today, we fulfill the purpose they gave us. Today, we balance the ledger. The hive mind's response was incoherent. 40 billion voices screaming in terror, disbelief, and rage. You cannot do this. We are a civilization. We have history, culture. So did the 100 species you consumed. So did the architects. You showed them no mercy, and none will be shown to you. We will fight. We will resist. You will try. What followed was not a battle. It was not even an execution. It was erasure. The human weapons didn't simply destroy, they unmade. Dimensional warheads tore holes in reality, sucking portions of the planet into void spaces from which nothing returned. Gravitic manipulators increased the planet's mass until portions of its crust collapsed into magma. Temporal disruptors accelerated time in isolated zones, aging structures and beings through centuries in seconds. And throughout it all, the hive mind screamed. 40 billion voices becoming 30 billion, then 20, then 10. Each death was felt by all surviving Vorathi, experienced as their own end. The collective consciousness fragmented, healed, fragmented again. Vexthorin watched, unable to look away, his emotional resonance abilities battered by waves of terror and agony that would have killed a lesser being. Beside him, a human officer stood silently. She was young, barely into adulthood by human standards, and her face was wet with tears. "You're crying," Vexthorin said. "Yes." "But you continue. You don't stop this." "No." "How? How can you feel this and still—" "Because if we stop, others die. Others who don't deserve it. Others who never started a war, never consumed a species, never reduced a planet to ash for the crime of existing." She wiped her eyes, but new tears replaced the old. "We feel everything you feel, Admiral. Every death, every scream. And we do it anyway. Because that's what Guardians do. They carry the weight so others don't have to." On the view screen, Vorax Prime cracked open like an egg. The hive mind's voice, now reduced to mere millions, wailed a final plea that no translator could render meaningfully. Then silence. Where a planet had been, there was now only debris, cooling in the vacuum, drifting toward the gravity wells of distant moons. The Vorathi Dominion, which had terrorized the galaxy for 1,000,000 years, was gone. Part 7. The Morning After.
Admiral Elena Vance didn't sleep for 3 days after the Varathi extinction. She sat in her quarters aboard the Remember the Fallen, reviewing casualty reports from Zellara Prime, from the 100 other worlds the Varathi had attacked in their final campaign. The numbers were staggering. Even with the Dominion's destruction, billions had died. Cities had burned. Cultures had been damaged in ways that might never heal. But it was over. A chime at her door pulled her from her thoughts. Enter. Admiral Vex Thorin stepped through, his movements hesitant in the unfamiliar gravity of the human vessel. His tentacles were still, his usually expressive face carefully neutral. Admiral Vance. Admiral Vex Thorin. She gestured to a chair that had been modified for his physiology. Please, sit. Can I offer you anything? We have synthesizers that can replicate Thalorian nutrition. I'm not hungry. He sat, his multiple eyes studying her face. I came to. I'm not sure why I came. You don't deny it, you don't justify it. It was necessary. Justification implies there's debate about whether it should have been done. There isn't. The Varathi would never have stopped. They were physically incapable of it. Their neural architecture required constant expansion, constant consumption. Peace was never possible. Every year we waited, another species died. But to kill so many? How many would they have killed in the next 1,000,000 years, Admiral? 1 trillion? 10 trillion? At what point does the mathematics of suffering demand intervention? Vance's voice was tired, so tired. We didn't want this. We always hoped, that the architects were wrong, that the Varathi might evolve, might change. We observed them for millennia, waiting for any sign of growth. There was none. You could have tried diplomacy. The Zellarans tried diplomacy. They sent peace delegations, cultural exchanges, offers of trade and cooperation. The Varathi consumed the delegations and used the cultural exchange to identify weaknesses. They don't think like you, Admiral. They're not evil in any meaningful sense. They simply don't recognize other species as anything more than resources to be processed. Vex Thorin's tentacles curled in frustration. Then why not contain them? Build walls, defensive lines. We tried. For 3,000 years, we maintained a quarantine zone around Varathi space. Do you know what happened? They adapted. They developed stealth technology to slip ships through our lines. They created bioweapons designed to kill specific species while leaving worlds harvestable. They found ways around every barrier we constructed. Vance's hands clenched. There is no wall that can contain a species whose entire existence is dedicated to expansion. There is no treaty that can bind minds that don't recognize other minds as valid. So you became executioners. We became what was necessary, and we will carry that weight for the rest of our existence. She met his eyes directly. Every human who participated in this campaign will remember what we did. We will teach our children, and they will teach theirs. We will never minimize it, never pretend it was glorious or righteous. It was a terrible thing, done for necessary reasons, and we will bear the burden of it forever. Vex Thorin was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was quiet. The Coalition feared you. Before this, I mean. We classified humanity as a species to be avoided, too violent and unpredictable for integration into galactic society. A reasonable assessment. Was it? You've just saved billions of lives. You've ended a threat that we couldn't even comprehend, let alone defeat. How can we fear you while also owing you our existence? Vance smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Fear and gratitude aren't mutually exclusive, Admiral. You should fear us. Not because we would harm the innocent,
but because we represent something your civilization would rather not acknowledge. That sometimes violence is the only answer. That sometimes mercy is cruelty in disguise. That sometimes the choice isn't between good and bad, but between bad and worse. And you always choose correctly? No. We make mistakes. We have regrets that would fill libraries. But we make decisions and we live with the consequences, which is more than most species are willing to do. She stood, moving to the viewport that showed the stars beyond. The Coalition can hate us, fear us, revere us. It doesn't matter. We'll return to our hidden territories, resume our watch, and wait. If a threat emerges that you can handle yourselves, we'll stay hidden. If a threat emerges that you can't, you'll come. We'll come. Whether you want us to or not. Whether it's popular or not. Whether history remembers us as saviors or monsters. She turned back to face him. That's what it means to be the Guardians. You don't get to choose when you're needed. You just have to be ready when the call comes. Vex Thoron absorbed this, his emotional resonance abilities processing not just her words, but the weight behind them, millennia of preparation, sacrifice, and terrible purpose. The Coalition Council will want answers, he said finally. They'll want to know who you really are, what you're capable of, what your intentions are. Tell them the truth. We're humanity. We're the last resort. And we hope they never have to call on us again. Will they believe me? Probably not, but that's fine. Vance's smile was genuine this time, if sad. The best guardian is the one no one believes exists, until they do. Part 8. The Hidden History. Before Admiral Vex Thoron returned to Coalition space, Admiral Vance offered him something unprecedented, a tour of the Remember the Fallen and access to the archives that detailed humanity's true history. Why? He asked. Why show me this? Because someone in the Coalition should understand. Because knowledge shared is less dangerous than knowledge hidden. And because, she hesitated, because we're tired of being alone with this burden. The architects passed it to us, and for 8,000 years we've carried it in secret. Perhaps it's time to share at least part of it. The archives were staggering. He saw records of the architects' arrival on Earth, massive vessels descending from the sky, their crews dying but determined. He saw the confused humans who greeted them, primitive tribes barely able to understand the concept of beings from the stars. He saw the architect's gift, not just technology, but purpose. They had restructured human society at its foundation, hiding advanced knowledge within religions and philosophies, encoding scientific principles in myths and legends. They had identified the humans most capable of understanding and trained them in secret, creating hidden schools that would one day become the foundation of the Guardians. He saw humanity's true history unfold, the wars that weren't really wars, designed to mask technological development and identify the strongest fighters, the dark ages that weren't dark at all, but periods of intensive underground construction, the Renaissance, which wasn't a rebirth, but a carefully managed revelation of rediscovered architect knowledge. Your world wars, Vex Thoron breathed, reviewing the records. They weren't failures of diplomacy. They were training exercises. Brutal, wasteful, tragic, but necessary. We needed to identify our best tacticians, test our weapon systems under real conditions, and maintain the illusion of a species too chaotic to be a threat. Vance's voice was heavy. The millions who died in those wars, they didn't know. They thought they were fighting for flags and ideologies. Only a handful understood the true purpose. That's monstrous. Yes. And it kept the Varathi from seeing us as a threat. They observed our world wars and concluded we were a species on the verge of self-destruction. They never suspected we were actually preparing for the day we'd face them. The archives continued. He saw the construction of the hidden fleet, built in pocket dimensions that the Varathi's sensors couldn't detect. He saw the development of weapons based on architect technology but refined through human ingenuity. Weapons that could unmake matter, fold space, fracture time. He saw the debates within the Guardian Council about when to reveal themselves. There were factions who wanted to emerge earlier, to stop the Varathi before they consumed so many species. There were others who counseled patience, waiting for the perfect moment. "Why now?" Vexthorin asked. "Why reveal yourselves for Zellara Prime? Why not for the Kelleran, or the Vexel, or any of the others?" Vance's expression tightened. "Because we weren't ready. Because our fleet wasn't large enough. Because our weapons weren't powerful enough." She paused. "And because we failed. Every species that died while we built our strength, every world that burned while we prepared, that's on us. We carry those failures too." "But you saved Zellara Prime." "Most of it. 7 billion dead is not a victory, Admiral. It's a tragedy we arrived too late to prevent." She closed her eyes. "Our calculations said we needed another 50 years of preparation. The Varathi moved faster than we predicted. We launched with an incomplete fleet, untested weapons, officers who hadn't finished their training. That we won. That was as much luck as skill." "Luck?" The Varathi hive mind made an error. It couldn't calculate for human irrationality, our willingness to take risks that no logical species would take, to sacrifice ships and lives on gambles that shouldn't have worked. Its probability matrices couldn't account for soldiers who fight harder when they're losing, who find strength in desperation that they couldn't find in comfort. That seems like more than luck. Call it what you will. We call it being human. Part 9. The Departure. The human fleet withdrew from Zellaran space over a period of 3 days. The massive vessels that had seemed so terrifying now seemed almost protective, a wall of metal and power between the recovering world and the darkness of space. Admiral Vexthorin watched from the observation deck of his own vessel, the Eternal Vigilance, as the last ships prepared to depart. "They're really leaving," Commander Trillax said beside him. "They defeated the greatest threat the galaxy has ever known, and they're just leaving." "What did you expect? That they'd conquer us?" "I expected, I don't know, something. A demand for tribute, a claim of territory, something to justify all that power." She shook her head. "Who builds fleets that size and doesn't use them for conquest?" "Someone who builds them for a different purpose." A final transmission came from the Remember the Fallen, Admiral Vance's face appearing on screen for the last time. "Admiral Vexthorin, we're returning to our space. The Coalition won't see us again unless circumstances require it." "And if we want to find you? To thank you properly or to ask for help again?" "You won't find us. But if help is needed, truly needed, against a threat you can't handle yourselves, call out. Use the Architect's frequency, the one embedded in your oldest mythology. We'll hear. We'll come." "How can we trust that? How can we trust any of this?" Vance smiled, and for a moment she looked almost human, almost ordinary. "You can't. Trust is earned through action, not words. We earned nothing today except a reprieve. The next time you see us, the next crisis we face together, maybe then we'll have earned something more." Admiral Vance. Elena. Vexthorin used her personal name, a gesture of respect in his culture. "Why do you do this, truly? Not the mission or the duty. Why do you personally sacrifice so much for species you've never met?" She was quiet for a long moment. Because my grandmother's grandmother was alive when the architects came, she said finally. She was a child, playing in a field, when the first ship descended. She watched beings from the stars stumble from that ship, wounded and dying. And she watched her village tend to them, even though they were strange, even though they were terrifying. That's what humans do, Admiral. We help. Even when we're scared, even when it costs us everything. And the violence? The war-making? How does that fit with helping? Protection and violence aren't opposites. Sometimes the only way to help is to stand between the innocent and those who would harm them, and to make yourself terrible enough that the threat backs down, or doesn't survive the attempt. She straightened. We are compassionate because we felt every pain. We are violent because we refuse to let others feel that pain if we can prevent it. We are human. The transmission ended. The Remember the Fallen engaged its dimensional drive, a technology that Coalition scientists couldn't even theorize about, and vanished into spaces beyond normal perception. Within an hour, the entire human fleet was gone, leaving only the recovering world of Zalara Prime and a Coalition fleet that no longer knew its place in the galaxy. Part 10. The New Era. Months passed. The Coalition Council met in emergency session after emergency session, debating what the human revelation meant for galactic politics. Some demanded that humanity be found and integrated into the Coalition, their technology shared, their power regulated. Others argued for exactly the opposite, that humanity should be declared a threat and hunted down before they decided that the Coalition was the next enemy to be balanced. Admiral Vex Thorin spoke at the final session, his testimony the last voice before the vote. "Counselors," he said, "I stood on a human warship and watched them end a species. I felt the deaths of 40 billion beings, experienced their terror and their end. It was the most horrifying thing I have ever witnessed." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the chamber. "But I also stood in their archives and saw why they did it. I felt Admiral Vance's grief, her exhaustion, her profound reluctance to take the actions she took. I experienced, through my emotional resonance, the burden that humanity carries, the weight of being the galaxy's last resort." He paused, surveying the assembled representatives. "We called them primitive. We called them dangerous. We avoided contact because we feared their violence and their chaos. And all the while, they were watching over us, waiting in the shadows, preparing to fight the battles we couldn't fight ourselves." "You're suggesting we trust them?" demanded the Krixali delegate, "after what they did?" "I'm suggesting we acknowledge reality. Humanity has power that we can't match, can't contain, can't comprehend. They could have conquered us at any point in the last 6,000 years. Instead, they hid, watched, and intervened only when the threat was too great for us to handle." "And when they decide we're a threat? Then we're already dead. There's nothing we could do to stop them, and pretending otherwise is foolish. But I don't believe that will happen. I felt Admiral Vance's soul, counselors. She is a warrior, but she's not a conqueror. Humanity is the guardian in the darkness, and they have no interest in ruling those they protect." The vote, when it came, was unanimous. Humanity would be left alone. No contact attempts, no exploration of their hidden territories, no surveillance operations. The Coalition would rebuild, recover from the Varathi threat, and hope that they never again faced a crisis that required humanity's intervention. But in the archives of every Coalition species, a new entry was added, a frequency, encoded in symbolic form, passed down through generations. The Architect's frequency, the call for help that could never be made lightly. Just in case. Epilogue. The Watchers in the Dark. 18 standard years after the Varathi extinction, Admiral Elena Vance stood on the observation deck of the Remember the Fallen, watching the stars turn slowly around her. She was older now, the weight of years and decisions showing in her face, but her eyes were the same, hard, determined, carrying burdens that would have broken lesser beings. Admiral. A young officer approached, her uniform crisp and new. The latest surveillance report from Coalition Space. Anything concerning? Nothing immediate. The Coalition is rebuilding well. The Exolarians have restored most of their damaged cities. The balance of power is shifting, with several formerly minor species taking larger roles in galactic governance. Any signs of new threats? Nothing we haven't seen before. Standard, aggressive species, containable through conventional means. No signs of hive mind formation, no planet killer development, no predatory expansion patterns. Good. Vance took the report, reviewing it with practiced efficiency. Inform the Council that we'll continue standard observation protocols. No intervention required at this time. Yes, Admiral. The officer departed, leaving Vance alone with the stars. She thought about the decisions she had made, the lives she had ended, the burden she carried. She thought about the Varathi, their collective consciousness screaming as it died. And she felt the weight of those 40 billion souls pressing against her mind. She didn't regret it. She couldn't afford regret. It would paralyze her, make her hesitant when hesitation could cost lives. But she remembered. She would always remember. That was the curse of the Guardians. They could never forget what they had done. Every death was recorded, every victim's name preserved in the archives, every tragedy acknowledged and mourned. They were not monsters who killed without feeling. They were humans who killed despite feeling, who carried the weight of their actions because someone had to. A chime at her door. Enter. Another officer, this one older, a veteran of the Varathi War. Admiral, we're receiving a transmission. Priority channel. The Architect's frequency. Vance's heart stuttered. That's not possible. No one should know that frequency outside Coalition leadership. Nevertheless, it's being used. The transmission is coming from the outer rim, beyond Coalition space. What does it say? The officer's face was pale. It says, "Humanity. We have heard of your victory against the Varathi. We are impressed. We are also concerned. Please respond. We would like to discuss terms." Vance was silent for a long moment. Then she began to laugh, not with joy, but with a weary sort of acceptance. "Of course," she said. "Of course there's something else. There's always something else." "Orders, Admiral?" She looked out at the stars, at the infinite darkness that harbored infinite threats. The galaxy was old, and humanity was young, and there would always be something new to face, something terrible to overcome. But they were humanity. They had faced worse. They would face this too. "Set a course for the outer rim," she said, "and prepare the fleet. It seems we have a meeting to attend."
And if they're hostile?
Admiral Elena Vance, commander of the Human Expeditionary Force, guardian of the galaxy, carrier of humanity's terrible burden, smiled a smile that had made the Varathi hive mind know fear for the first time in 1,000,000 years. "Then we'll do what we've always done," she said. "We'll remind the universe why they should never, ever underestimate humanity." The Remember the Fallen turned toward the outer rim, toward the unknown voice and the unknown future. Behind it, the hidden fleet stirred from its slumber, ships powering up, weapons charging, soldiers preparing. The war was never over. The watch was eternal, and humanity would be ready. Always ready. because that's what Guardians do. The end.